The cold steel of the sergeant's pistol pressed against her temple, his finger trembling on the trigger as 20 elite operators formed a silent circle around them. He thought he was making an example of weakness. He thought she was just another woman who didn't belong in their world. What he didn't know was that the quiet intelligence analyst he'd been tormenting for 6 months had a secret, one that would turn his nightmare into hers in exactly 47 seconds. This is the story of how Imani Martinez, the woman they dismissed as too soft for combat, taught an entire special operations unit that the deadliest warriors don't always announce themselves. Before we continue, let us know where you're watching from. If you're enjoying this, don't miss out, subscribe now for more. The compound outside Rota, Spain, shimmered under the Mediterranean sun at 0530 hours, but Imani Martinez had been awake since 3. She stood in the shadows of the communications tower, watching the dawn paint the training grounds in shades of amber and gold, her hands wrapped around a cup of tea that had gone cold an hour ago. The base hummed with its usual pre-dawn rhythm, generators purring, satellite dishes rotating, boots on pavement as the night watch prepared to hand over to day shift. Imani had been stationed at Naval Station Rota for 9 months, and every morning felt identical. She was a ghost. At 26, she stood barely 5'4" and weighed perhaps 115 pounds. Her mixed heritage, a Spanish mother and Kenyan father, had given her striking features and a quiet intensity that people often mistook for fragility. Her fellow personnel called her the Librarian behind her back, though never with particular cruelty. She was the kind of person who analyzed intelligence reports with surgical precision, who could speak 4 languages fluently, who understood terrorist financing networks better than anyone in her unit. But when it came to field operations, the ones that mattered, she was always left behind. The briefing room buzzed with anticipation as she slipped inside. Digital displays covered every wall, satellite imagery marking high-value targets, blue lines tracing infiltration routes. Gunnery Sergeant Vincent Hale stood at the front, his scarred face serious as he addressed the assembled SEAL team. Imani found a spot near the back, her tablet ready, though she already knew what was coming. Today's operation is codenamed Silent Thunder, Hale announced, his voice carrying the weight of 20 years in special operations. We've got actionable intelligence on a weapons cache in Sector 9. Heavy security, complex layout. I need operators who can handle themselves in close quarters. Imani's stylus hovered over her tablet. As Hale began reading names, each one felt like a small knife twist in her chest. Reeves, your team leader. Kowalski, you're on point. Patterson, you handle breach. Yamamoto, you're covering R6. The names continued, each one belonging to someone she'd trained alongside, whose intelligence briefings she'd prepared, whose missions she'd supported from the operations center. She'd outscored most of them in language proficiency, could analyze battlefield intelligence faster than anyone in the unit, could navigate political landscapes that left hardened operators confused. But when real missions came up, she was always assigned to intelligence support. Martinez. Hale's voice cut through her thoughts. You're on intelligence coordination. Make sure we have real-time updates on enemy positions. Intelligence coordination. Again. Imani nodded curtly, her jaw tight. Around her, the selected operators exchanged confident grins and fist bumps. She might as well have been furniture. As the briefing dispersed, she caught fragments of conversation that made her stomach churn. Good thing Martinez isn't coming with us, Petty Officer Patterson muttered to Kowalski. No offense, but I wouldn't trust someone that soft to have my back in a firefight. She's smart, I'll give her that, Kowalski replied. But there's smart and there's combat ready. If things go sideways, I want someone who can actually fight, not someone who'll freeze up. Imani pretended not to hear, but the words burned. She'd heard variations of this conversation dozens of times. Too soft, too emotional, too much of a liability. It didn't matter that she scored expert on every weapon qualification or that her hand-to-hand combat scores exceeded half the men in her unit. When it came to the dangerous work, she was always deemed insufficient. The worst part was that she understood their reasoning, at least partially. She did cry during emotional moments. She did wear her heart more openly than the stoic operators around her. But they confused emotional intelligence with weakness, empathy with inability. And she'd never been given the chance to prove that her unique combination of analytical brilliance and physical capability might be worth more than just another trigger finger. As the team prepared for departure, Imani walked to her quarters and pulled out her go-bag. Hidden beneath regulation items was something nobody on base knew about, her SEAL qualification training certificate, earned during a program so classified that her official records showed only her intelligence analyst role. For 3 years before this assignment, she'd operated in a specialized unit that didn't officially exist, conducting missions in places the government would never acknowledge. She'd left that world behind after a mission in Yemen went wrong, after she'd watched her team leader die because of faulty intelligence she'd been forced to act on. The trauma had driven her to request a transfer to a pure intelligence role, somewhere she could save lives without pulling triggers. But the skills remained, hidden beneath the persona of the soft-spoken analyst who preferred data to direct action. Nobody had asked about her background. Nobody knew she was doing this, studying the compound layouts, memorizing guard rotations, preparing contingency plans for operations she'd never be part of. She'd learned long ago that being ready for opportunity was the only way to create it. The helicopters lifted off at 0630, their rotors thundering across the base as they disappeared toward the horizon. Imani stood near the communications center, watching until they were just specks against the morning sky, then turned back to her assigned duties. She had intelligence reports to monitor, communications to coordinate, and a growing sense that today would be different. She just didn't know how different yet. For weeks had passed since the Silent Thunder mission, a successful operation that had earned the team commendations while Imani earned another day of coordinating intelligence feeds from a climate-controlled operations center. She'd watched the celebration from across the mess hall, nursing her tea and trying to ignore the familiar ache in her chest. The whispers had started immediately after the team's return. Not about the mission itself, but about her. Imani first noticed it during a routine intelligence briefing when Sergeant Vincent Hale asked her to verify her source assessment. Simple enough, except his tone carried an edge she hadn't heard before. "You sure about these threat assessments, Martinez?" Hale had asked, tapping his finger against the display screen. "Because if you're wrong about enemy capabilities, it's going to be a problem." Imani had triple-checked everything. Her assessments were correct, as they always were. But Hale's doubt planted a seed that began to grow throughout the unit. Soon, other small incidents followed. Her intelligence reports were questioned more thoroughly than anyone else's. Her security clearance paperwork was suddenly flagged for routine review. During morning physical training, she caught sidelong glances when she outperformed expectations, as if her competence was somehow suspicious. The breaking point came during a routine briefing about base security protocols. Imani sat in her usual spot, taking notes on new communications procedures, when she heard her name mentioned in a conversation 2 rows ahead. "I'm just saying, Martinez spends a lot of time analyzing operational patterns," Petty Officer Davis was whispering to his neighbor. "More than someone in pure intelligence really needs to. She asks questions about team movements, extraction protocols, stuff that's not really her lane." "What's that supposed to mean?" the other sailor replied. "Maybe nothing," Davis continued. "But she's always digging deeper than necessary. Makes you wonder what she's really looking for. And she's so emotional about everything. Gets teary-eyed during mission debriefs when casualties are discussed. That kind of instability doesn't belong in special operations." Imani's stylus stopped moving. She stared at the back of Davis's head, feeling heat rise in her cheeks. Her dedication to understanding operations, something that made her better at providing intelligence support, was being twisted into something questionable. And her emotional honesty, her refusal to become numb to the cost of warfare, was being used as evidence of instability. After the briefing, she cornered Davis near the armory. "Is there something you want to say to me directly?" she asked, her voice steady despite the anger building inside her. Davis looked uncomfortable, glancing around to make sure they weren't overheard. "Look, Martinez, I didn't mean anything by it. It's just, You have to admit you're pretty intense about stuff that's not exactly in your job description. My job description is intelligence analyst, Imani replied. That means understanding every aspect of our operations so I can provide the best possible support. I'm sorry if my thoroughness makes you uncomfortable. Hey, don't get defensive. I'm just saying maybe you should focus on what you're actually assigned to do instead of trying to play operator. The words hit like a physical blow. Imani had spent 9 months proving herself, had earned respect through competence and dedication, and now that was being questioned because she cared too much about doing her job well. She walked away without another word, but the damage was done. Over the following days, she noticed more changes. Her suggestions during briefings were met with polite dismissal. Her requests for additional training were quietly denied. Even her colleague Rachel, one of the few other women on base, seemed to be keeping her distance. The isolation grew worse when Gunnery Sergeant Hale called her into his office for what he termed a performance discussion. Imani sat across from his desk, her service records spread out between them like evidence at a trial. Martinez, you're technically proficient, Hale began, his fingers drumming against the desk. Your intelligence analysis is comprehensive. But there have been some concerns raised about your focus. What kind of concerns, Sergeant? The kind that suggest you might be more interested in operational matters outside your assigned role. I need to know that my intelligence personnel are focused on intelligence, not distracted by field operations they're not qualified for. Imani felt something cold settle in her stomach. Sergeant, I've never neglected my assigned duties. My performance reviews have been consistently exceptional. That's not the issue. The issue is scope. You're studying tactical movements, extraction procedures, close-quarters combat scenarios, all things that fall outside your area of responsibility. It's creating questions about your priorities. My priority is to be the best analyst I can be, Imani said carefully. To provide the best possible intelligence support, I need to understand how that intelligence will be used in the field. Hale leaned back in his chair, studying her with eyes that seemed to weigh her worth. The mission requires you to analyze data, Martinez. Nothing more. I'm going to need you to scale back the extracurricular focus. Stick to your lane. Imani left the office feeling like she'd been punched in the gut. Her dedication was being treated as a character flaw. Her preparation as potential insubordination. She was being systematically pushed into a smaller and smaller box, told to limit herself to the narrow role others had decided she was suited for. That night, she sat in her quarters staring at the tactical manuals she'd been studying. Months of careful preparation, notes on urban combat scenarios, close-quarters battle drills, all of it dismissed as inappropriate ambition. She thought about putting them away, about accepting the limitations others had placed on her. Instead, she locked them in her personal footlocker and added a new manual on psychological operations. If today had taught her anything, it was that being ready wasn't just about opportunity. It was about survival in an environment that saw her emotional intelligence as weakness rather than strength. We've invested considerable effort in bringing you this story. If you find it engaging, please consider subscribing to our channel. Your support is greatly appreciated. Now, let's return to the narrative. The incident that would change everything began on a Tuesday morning that had started like any other. Imani was reviewing intelligence reports in the operations center when the emergency alert sounded, not the usual drill, but the sharp, insistent tone that meant real danger. She dropped her tablet and ran toward the command center, her heart hammering against her ribs. The main display showed a situation unfolding in real time. A surveillance team had been compromised during a routine mission near the Moroccan border. 2 operators were pinned down, their extraction helicopter unable to reach them due to unexpected anti-aircraft capabilities. Commander Pierce stood at the center of the controlled chaos, his face grim as he coordinated the response. Reeves, take your team and attempt extraction from the north approach. Kowalski, you're back up on the south side. Sir, Reeves's voice crackled through the radio. Both approaches are covered by heavy weapons. We can't get close enough without taking casualties. Imani watched the tactical display, her mind automatically processing the terrain data, weather patterns, and enemy positions. She'd studied this region extensively during her previous assignment, knew there was a wadi system that could provide concealed approach routes. But speaking up now, after being told to stay in her lane, felt dangerous. Then find another way, Pierce snapped. We've got 2 operators in hostile territory. I need solutions. The room filled with tense deliberation as team leaders proposed and rejected various approaches. Each plan had fatal flaws, too exposed, too slow, too dependent on equipment they didn't have on hand. Imani felt the familiar frustration building. She had the solution, had studied this exact terrain, knew the route that could work. Sir. Her voice cut through the debate, quieter than she intended but clear enough to turn heads. There's a wadi system that runs parallel to their position. It's not on the standard maps, but it provides concealed approach within 200 meters of their location. The room fell silent. Commander Pierce turned to her, his expression hovering between hope and skepticism. Martinez, how do you know about terrain features that aren't on our maps? I studied regional geography during a previous assignment, sir. The wadi system is seasonal, which is why it's not always visible on satellite imagery. But current conditions should make it accessible. Gunnery Sergeant Hale stepped forward, his face hard. Martinez, this isn't the time for theoretical analysis. We need concrete solutions, not guesswork from someone who's never been in the field. It's not guesswork, Sergeant, Imani replied, her voice steadier now. I've analyzed this terrain extensively. The wadi approach is our best option. Based on what? Hale challenged. Satellite photos and academic study? That's not the same as real operational experience. Imani met his gaze directly. Based on having operated in that exact region for 2 years with a unit that doesn't appear in official records. Based on having used that wadi system for 3 separate extractions. Based on real operational experience, Sergeant. The command center went completely silent. Every eye turned to her, most filled with disbelief. Commander Pierce's expression shifted from skepticism to sharp interest. What unit, Martinez? Task Force Obsidian, sir. Counterterrorism operations in North Africa. My service records show intelligence analyst because that was my cover assignment. Hale's face had gone pale, then red with anger. You're claiming to be a SEAL? That's a serious allegation, Martinez. I'm not claiming anything, Sergeant. I am a SEAL. My qualification is classified under a different program, but I can provide authentication codes if necessary. Pierce held up a hand, silencing Hale's response. We'll verify that later. Right now, I've got 2 operators in danger. Martinez, if you know this terrain, I need you to guide the extraction team. Sir, I can do better than guide them, Imani said. I can lead the extraction. I know every meter of that wadi system, every potential ambush point, every emergency egress route. Absolutely not, Hale interjected. Even if her story checks out, and I have serious doubts, she hasn't operated with this team. She hasn't maintained tactical proficiency. Sending her would be suicide. Imani turned to face Hale fully. Sergeant, with respect, I've maintained my proficiency. Every morning at 0400, before anyone else is awake, I've been running tactical drills. Every weekend, I've been at the range. Every spare moment, I've been studying. I've been ready for this exact situation. Why? Pierce asked, his tone genuinely curious. If you're really a SEAL, why take an analyst assignment? Why hide your capabilities? The answer came harder than Imani expected, touching wounds she tried to bury. Because I lost my team leader in Yemen due to bad intelligence I was forced to act on. I thought if I focused purely on intelligence, I could save lives without bearing the weight of pulling triggers. But I never stopped training because I knew that one day, someone might need what I can do. Commander Pierce studied Imani for what felt like an eternity, his weathered face revealing nothing. Around them, the command center held its collective breath, waiting for a decision that would either validate or destroy her revelation. Authentication codes, Pierce finally said. Give them to me now. Imani recited a string of alphanumeric characters she hadn't spoken aloud in 3 years. Pierce turned to his communications officer, who typed rapidly and then looked up with wide eyes. Sir, codes authenticate. She's listed under classified personnel, special operations, compartmented access. The room erupted in murmurs. Hale's face cycled through disbelief, anger, and something that might have been embarrassment. This is impossible. She's been here 9 months. Why wouldn't this be in her base records? Because Task Force Obsidian doesn't exist in standard records, Sergeant, Pierce replied curtly. And right now, I don't care about bureaucratic mysteries. I care about getting my people home. He turned back to Imani. You're certain about this Wadi approach? Yes, sir. It's our best chance. Then you'll guide Reeves's team. You'll coordinate from. No, sir, Imani interrupted, earning shocked looks. Respectfully, coordination won't work. The Wadi system has multiple branches, and one wrong turn puts the team in a kill zone. The terrain shifts with seasonal flooding. I need to be there to navigate in real time. Hale stepped forward, his voice tight with barely controlled anger. Commander, I must object. Sending Martinez on this operation is reckless. Even if her credentials are legitimate, she's been out of field operations for 3 years. She's not current on team tactics, not integrated with our operators, and frankly, her emotional stability is questionable. My emotional stability? Imani's voice remained calm, but her eyes flashed. You mean the fact that I don't pretend casualties are just statistics? That I remember these are human beings we're trying to save? I mean the fact that you cry during mission debriefs, Hale shot back. That you get emotionally invested in outcomes. In the field, that kind of emotional response gets people killed. Imani turned to face him fully, her small frame somehow filling the space between them. Sergeant Hale, I've cried during debriefs because I have the capacity to feel the weight of what we do. That doesn't make me weak, it makes me human. And in my experience, the most dangerous operators aren't the ones who feel too much. They're the ones who feel nothing at all. This is exactly what I'm talking about, Hale said, appealing to Pierce. She's emotional, defensive, and clearly has difficulty following established protocols. Sir, I'm formally recommending against this course of action. Pierce looked between them, then at the tactical display where 2 dots represented American operators growing weaker by the minute. Martinez, you'll have 15 minutes to gear up and brief Reeves's team on the approach route. Sergeant Hale, you'll accompany the operation as tactical oversight. Sir, Hale began. That's an order, Sergeant. If Martinez's credentials are real, you'll verify her tactical proficiency in the field. If they're not, you'll take command and court-martial her when you get back. Either way, we're not leaving our people behind. Imani snapped a salute and headed for the armory, feeling the weight of dozens of stairs following her. In the equipment room, she opened her personal locker and began pulling out gear that most intelligence analysts would never possess, a custom-fitted plate carrier, weapons she'd maintained in secret, navigation equipment that spoke of field experience. Petty Officer Reeves appeared in the doorway, his expression a mixture of confusion and cautious respect. So, you're really a SEAL? Does it matter? Imani asked, checking her rifle's action. Right now, I'm just someone who knows how to get your teammates home. It matters to me, Reeves replied. I need to know if I can trust you to have my back. Imani paused, meeting his eyes. 3 years ago, I lost someone I trusted because I followed orders to use questionable intelligence. I've spent every day since then preparing to make sure that never happens again. You can trust that I will bring every skill, every ounce of determination I have to get your team out safely. Whether that's enough for you, that's your call. Reeves nodded slowly. Then let's go get our people. As Imani finished gearing up, she caught her reflection in a locker mirror. The soft-spoken analyst was gone, replaced by something harder, more focused. But the eyes remained the same, still capable of tears, still carrying the weight of past losses, still human in a world that often mistook humanity for weakness. She secured her helmet and headed for the helicopter, knowing that in the next few hours, she would either prove that emotional intelligence and tactical excellence could coexist, or she would become another cautionary tale about women who reached beyond their assigned roles. The helicopter's rotors cut through the Mediterranean air as Imani sat among Reeves's team, feeling the familiar pre-mission focus settle over her like a second skin. Across from her, Sergeant Hale sat rigid, his jaw clenched, clearly still processing the revelation about her background. The other operators kept glancing at her, their expressions ranging from curiosity to skepticism. 5 minutes to insertion, the pilot's voice crackled through their headsets. Imani pulled up the tactical map on her wrist display, marking the route through the Wadi system. Listen up. The primary Wadi runs northeast for 800 meters before branching. We take the eastern branch, the western one looks easier but leads directly into an observation point. The terrain is loose rock and seasonal mud. Move carefully but quickly. How do you know about the observation point? One of the operators asked. It's not on our intelligence. Because I helped establish it 4 years ago during a counter-smuggling operation, Imani replied. The local militia has been using it ever since. Hale leaned forward. If you're so familiar with this area, why didn't you mention any of this during your 9 months here? Imani met his gaze steadily. Because I was told repeatedly to stay in my lane, Sergeant. To focus on analysis and stop trying to play operator. I assumed my field experience wasn't welcome. The helicopter descended rapidly, and conversation ceased. They fast-roped into a dry riverbed surrounded by scrub vegetation and rocky outcroppings. The moment Imani's boots hit the ground, 3 years of desk work vanished. Her body remembered the rhythm of tactical movement, the constant threat assessment, the weight of responsibility for the lives around her. She took point, moving with a confidence that clearly surprised the team. The Wadi system was exactly as she remembered, a maze of natural channels carved by centuries of flash floods. She navigated without hesitation, her hand signals crisp and professional. They'd covered 400 meters when Hale caught up to her position. Martinez, hold up. His voice was low, meant only for her. I need to know something. Why did you really leave field operations? I told you. You told the commander about bad intelligence in Yemen. But there's more to it, isn't there? Imani kept scanning the terrain as she spoke. My team leader, Lieutenant Sarachin, trusted me to verify intelligence about a high-value target's location. The source seemed solid, but I had doubts. I raised them, but I was ordered to confirm the intelligence anyway. When we hit the target house, it was a trap. Chen took a round protecting me during the ambush. She bled out before we could extract. That wasn't your fault, Hale said, something in his tone softening. Bad intelligence happens. It's part of the job. I know that intellectually, Imani replied. But emotionally, I carry it every day. That's why I requested the analyst transfer. I thought if I focused purely on intelligence, I could prevent others from making the same mistakes. But you were right about one thing, Sergeant. I never stopped being a SEAL. I just tried to pretend I could separate that part of myself from the grief. Before Hale could respond, Imani's hand shot up in a halt signal. Ahead, voices carried on the wind, the distinctive cadence of the local dialect. She signaled for the team to take cover, then crept forward to assess. 3 militia fighters were positioned near the Wadi intersection, exactly where she'd predicted. They were casual, unaware, smoking cigarettes and talking. Taking them down would alert others in the area, but the route required passing within meters of their position. Imani signaled her plan to Hale, a silent approach using a narrow side channel that would bypass the fighters. Hale studied the route and nodded approval. The team moved like shadows, and Imani felt a surge of satisfaction as they passed undetected. The Wadi opened into a broader valley, and Imani could see the pinned-down operator's position ahead. But between them and the extraction point, movement caught her eye. A patrol of at least 8 fighters was converging on the same location. Contact imminent, she whispered into her radio. 8 hostiles, approaching from the west. We need to reach our people before that patrol does. Can we engage the patrol? Reeves asked. Negative, Imani replied. Gunfire will draw every fighter in the area. We need another approach. She studied the terrain, her mind racing through options. Then she saw it, a collapsed section of the wadi wall that would provide covered access to their teammates' position, but it required someone to create a distraction while the team moved. I'll draw the patrol north, Imani said. Give you a window to extract the team. That's suicide, Hale said flatly. You'll be alone against 8 hostiles. Not suicide, tactics. I know this terrain, Sergeant. I can lose them in the secondary wadi system and circle back to the extraction point. Hale grabbed Imani's arm, his grip firm but not rough. Martinez, if you're wrong about this terrain, you're dead. And if you're right but unlucky, you're still dead. I can't authorize a solo diversion. Imani gently pulled her arm free, her dark eyes meeting his with unwavering certainty. Sergeant, those 2 operators have maybe 20 minutes before that patrol finds them. We don't have time for a committee decision. You wanted to know if I'm really a SEAL? This is what SEALs do, we make the hard calls when lives are on the line. She didn't wait for permission. Moving quickly but quietly, she circled to a position that would draw the patrol away from both her team and the stranded operators. She found a rocky outcropping that would provide temporary cover, took a deep breath, and fired 3 suppressed rounds into the dirt near the patrol's position. The effect was immediate. The fighters scattered, shouting and pointing toward her position. Imani fired twice more, then moved, using the terrain exactly as she'd planned. The patrol followed, their discipline poor, their spacing terrible. She'd bought her team the window they needed. But as she navigated deeper into the wadi system, Imani realized she'd miscalculated one variable. The seasonal flooding she'd mentioned had altered one of the channels. The route she'd planned to use for egress was now blocked by a collapse of mud and stone. Martinez, report status, Hale's voice came through her earpiece. Slight complication, she replied, breathing hard as she scrambled up a steep section. My primary egress route is blocked. Moving to alternate position. Defined slight complication. The patrol is closer than I'd like, and I'm running out of terrain. She reached a narrow ridge that overlooked the valley. Below, she could see her team successfully reaching the stranded operators and beginning their extraction. The diversion had worked. It had also left her trapped on a ridge with 8 increasingly angry fighters closing in. Imani found a defensive position among the rocks and assessed her options. She had ammunition, training, and intimate knowledge of the terrain. What she didn't have was a clear path to safety. The fighters were spreading out, attempting to surround her position. Martinez, we have the package, Reeves's voice came through. Moving to extraction point. What's your position? Coordinates transmitting now, Imani replied, marking her location. But don't wait for me. Get those operators to safety. Negative, we're not leaving you, Hale interjected. Hold your position. We're coming to you. Sergeant, that puts the entire team at risk. Extract the wounded in. That's an order, Martinez. You wanted to prove you're a SEAL? Then act like one and follow orders. Hold that position. Imani smiled despite the situation. Copy that, Sergeant. Holding position. The next 15 minutes became a masterclass in defensive tactics. Imani used the terrain to her advantage, firing precisely when fighters exposed themselves, conserving ammunition, never taking unnecessary risks. She wasn't trying to win, just to survive long enough for extraction. When she heard the distinctive sound of her team approaching from below, she felt a surge of relief mixed with frustration. They'd risked themselves coming back for her. It was exactly what she would have done, but it still felt like a failure on her part. Covering fire. Hale's voice called out, and suddenly the fighters found themselves caught between Imani's position above and her team below. The engagement lasted less than 3 minutes. The militia fighters, realizing they were outmatched and outmaneuvered, broke contact and retreated. Imani descended from her ridge to find Hale waiting, his expression unreadable. That was reckless, he said. That was necessary, Imani replied. It was both. Hale extended his hand. It was also one of the gutsiest things I've seen in 20 years of special operations. I owe you an apology, Martinez. Several of them, actually. Imani shook his hand, feeling the weight of 9 months of dismissal and doubt finally beginning to lift. We can discuss apologies after we're safely extracted, Sergeant. As they moved toward the extraction point, Reeves fell in beside her. So, the crying during mission debriefs? Still happens, Imani said honestly. I'll probably cry when I write up this operation, thinking about what could have gone wrong. Good, Reeves replied. Maybe it'll keep us honest about what we do out here. The helicopter ride back felt different. The operators who dismissed her as the librarian now looked at her with respect, even admiration. But Imani felt conflicted. She'd proven she could still operate at the highest level, but she'd also been forced back into a world she'd tried to leave behind. The debriefing room felt different this time. Instead of sitting in the back corner, Imani found herself at the conference table's center, still in her tactical gear, fielding questions from Commander Pierce and a hastily assembled group of senior officers. The rescued operators had already been transferred to medical, and preliminary reports indicated both would make full recoveries. Let me make sure I understand this correctly, Commander Pierce said, reviewing the mission logs on his tablet. You identified an approach route not in our database, led a team through hostile territory, created a diversion that allowed extraction of 2 operators, and held off 8 enemy fighters alone while your team completed the mission. The team completed the mission, sir, Imani corrected. I just provided route guidance and created an opportunity for them to execute. That's a generous interpretation, Reeves interjected from where he stood near the wall. Sir, Martinez didn't just guide us, she ran point through that entire Wadi system like she owned it. The tactical decisions she made under pressure were textbook SEAL operations. Sergeant Hale cleared his throat, his expression notably different from the skepticism he'd shown hours earlier. Commander, I need to formally retract my earlier concerns about Specialist Martinez's capabilities. Her performance in the field was exemplary. However, I do have questions about why her actual qualifications weren't made known when she transferred to this unit. That's above my clearance, Sergeant, Pierce replied. But I've received confirmation from SOCOM that Martinez's credentials are legitimate and that her previous assignment was correctly classified. The question now is what we do moving forward. Sir, if I may, Imani said carefully. I didn't come to this unit seeking field operations. I genuinely requested an intelligence role. What happened today was necessary, but it doesn't change the fact that I've been trying to step away from direct action. Why? The question came from Lieutenant Commander Walsh, the base psychologist who'd been called in to observe the debriefing. You clearly have elite-level capabilities. Why hide them? Imani felt the familiar tightness in her chest, the emotion she'd been suppressing since the mission began threatening to surface. Because I watched my team leader die due to intelligence I'd been ordered to verify against my better judgment. Because I thought if I focused purely on analysis, I could save lives without carrying the weight of combat decisions. Because sometimes being good at something doesn't mean it's good for you. The room fell silent. Walsh leaned forward, her expression compassionate. And today? How do you feel about what happened today? Conflicted, Imani admitted, feeling her eyes begin to burn with unshed tears. Proud that we got everyone home safely. Angry that I had to prove myself through combat when my intelligence work should have been enough. Scared that you'll all see these tears and decide I'm too emotional for any role in this unit. She swiped at her eyes, frustrated with herself. See? This is why I didn't want anyone knowing about my background. Because I can be an expert operator and still cry during debriefs. I can make life or death decisions under fire and still feel the weight of those decisions afterward. But people see the emotions and assume it means I'm weak or unstable. Martinez, Commander Pierce said gently. Nobody in this room thinks you're weak. What we're seeing is someone who has the courage to remain human in a profession that often demands we pretend we're not. Hale stood up, his weathered face showing something that might have been respect mixed with remorse. "Sir, I need to make a statement for the record. Over the past 9 months, I've repeatedly dismissed Martinez's capabilities, questioned her focus, and treated her emotional intelligence as a liability rather than an asset. I based these assessments on prejudice and assumption rather than actual performance." He turned to face Imani directly. "Martinez, I was wrong. About your capabilities, about your dedication, and most importantly, about what strength looks like. I'm formally apologizing, and I'm requesting that my previous negative assessments be stricken from your record." Imani nodded, not trusting herself to speak without her voice breaking. The apology mattered, but it couldn't erase 9 months of being overlooked and dismissed. "The question remains," Pierce continued, "what happens now? Martinez, you've proven you can operate at the highest level. But you've also expressed a preference for intelligence work. This command needs to decide how best to utilize your unique skill set." "Sir, if I could make a suggestion," Walsh interjected. "Perhaps the answer is an either-or. Martinez's combination of analytical expertise and operational experience is rare. There may be a role that leverages both without forcing her back into full-time direct action." Imani felt a flicker of hope. A role that acknowledged all of her capabilities without demanding she suppress the parts of herself that made her effective. It was more than she'd dared to expect. But before Pierce could respond, the door burst open and a communications officer rushed in, her face pale. "Sir, we have a situation developing. Flash message from SOCOM, there's been an incident at the base perimeter." The command center erupted into controlled chaos as personnel rushed to their stations. Imani followed Commander Pierce and Sergeant Hale, her exhaustion forgotten in the face of a new crisis. The main display showed security camera feeds from the base perimeter where a confrontation was unfolding. A civilian vehicle had crashed through the outer checkpoint. Base security had responded, but the situation had escalated when the driver, a local national who worked in base services, had pulled a weapon. Now he was surrounded by security forces, shouting in Arabic, his gun pressed against the head of a hostage he'd grabbed during the chaos. Imani's stomach dropped as she recognized the hostage. It was Petty Officer Davis, the same man who'd questioned her dedication just weeks earlier. "What's he saying?" Pierce demanded, watching the standoff on screen. Demanding immediate release of his brother from military custody, the Arabic-speaking intelligence officer translated. "He's claiming his brother was wrongfully detained during last week's security sweep. Says he'll execute the hostage if we don't comply within 30 minutes. His brother is currently at a detention facility 300 miles from here," Hale reported, checking his tablet. "There's no way to physically move him here in 30 minutes even if we wanted to negotiate." Imani stepped closer to the screen, watching the gunman's body language, listening to his words. Something was wrong with the translation, subtle but significant. "He's not demanding his brother's release," she said quietly. Every head turned toward her. "What?" the translator asked, clearly offended. "His word choice, he's using Ikwani, which can mean brother, but in this context, with his dialect and inflection, he means brother in faith, not family. He's not talking about a detained relative. He's talking about releasing prisoners in general, likely members of his militia cell." Pierce looked between Imani and the translator. "You're certain?" "Sir, I spent 2 years working with tribal militias. Regional dialects matter. He's also using phrases that suggest he's stalling, not negotiating. This isn't about prisoner release, it's a diversion." "For what?" Hale asked. Imani's mind raced, connecting patterns she'd seen in previous operations. "Sir, I need to review security logs from the past 24 hours. If this is a diversion, there's a primary objective we're not seeing." Pierce nodded to the security officer, who pulled up the logs. Imani scanned through them rapidly, her analytical training taking over. There, 3 unusual access attempts to the communications facility, all logged in the past 6 hours, all attributed to maintenance issues. "The communications facility," Imani said with growing certainty. "Someone's trying to access our secure networks." The hostage situation is keeping all security attention focused on the perimeter while the real threat is inside the base. That's a significant leap, the intelligence officer protested. Based on what evidence? Based on operational patterns I've seen before. Sir, we need to check the communications facility immediately. Pierce studied her for a moment, then made his decision. Hale, take a team to the communications facility. Martinez, you're with me. We're going to resolve this hostage situation. As they moved toward the perimeter, Imani felt Hale grab her arm. Martinez, if you're wrong about the communications facility, we're leaving it vulnerable while we chase ghosts. And if I'm right, we're about to lose control of our entire secure network, Imani countered. Trust the analysis, Sergeant. It's what I do best. At the perimeter, the situation had deteriorated. The gunman was becoming more agitated, his weapon wavering between Davis's head and the surrounding security forces. Imani could see Davis's face was pale but controlled. He was keeping himself together, but barely. I need a clear channel to speak to him, Imani told Pierce. In Arabic, directly. You want to negotiate? Pierce looked skeptical. I want to distract him. If he's really stalling for someone else to complete an objective, then disrupting his timeline might force mistakes. Pierce considered this, then nodded. A communications specialist set up a loudspeaker system, and Imani took a deep breath before speaking in flawless Arabic, her voice carrying across the standoff zone. She didn't demand or plead. Instead, she spoke of specific tribal customs from the gunman's home region, invoking principles of honor and protection that she knew would resonate culturally. She acknowledged his grievances while subtly questioning whether his current actions aligned with the values he claimed to uphold. The gunman's attention fixed on her, his expression shifting from aggressive certainty to confusion. He responded in rapid Arabic, questioning how she knew about his tribal customs, his home village, his family's history in the region. I know because I've walked in your homeland, Imani replied in the same dialect he was using. I've shared tea with elders who remember your grandfather. I understand why you feel betrayed, why you believe this action is justified. But taking an innocent life will not honor your family or your cause, it will only bring shame. Behind the gunman, Imani saw the security team beginning to reposition, using her distraction to gain better tactical angles. She kept talking, weaving cultural references with practical negotiations, keeping the gunman's focus on her rather than his hostage. Then her earpiece crackled with Hale's voice. Martinez was right. We found 2 individuals inside the communications facility attempting to access secure systems. They're in custody. The diversion is over. Imani switched to English, speaking clearly so the gunman would understand through the translator. Your mission has failed. The people in the communications facility have been captured. You're alone now, and what you do next determines whether you're remembered as a man of honor or a man who murdered an unarmed prisoner. The gunman's eyes widened as Imani's words registered. For a long moment, the entire base seemed to hold its breath. The weapon remained pressed against Davis's temple, but Imani could see the calculation in the man's expression shifting from determination to desperate uncertainty. You're lying, he said in Arabic, his voice cracking. My brothers would not fail. Your brothers are in custody, Imani replied calmly in his dialect. The security forces found them attempting to access classified systems. They surrendered without violence because they knew the mission was compromised. Now you have a choice, surrender with honor, or die here for nothing. The gunman's hand trembled. His eyes darted between Imani, the surrounding security forces, and Davis, whose controlled breathing was the only sign of his terror. Imani could see the moment the man's resolve began to crumble, but she also recognized something more dangerous replacing it, panic. Put down the weapon, Imani said, her voice softening. Your family doesn't need to mourn you today. Your children don't need to grow up without a father. There is still a path forward that preserves your honor. There is no honor in surrender, the gunman spat back, but his conviction was wavering. There is no honor in murdering an unarmed man, Imani countered. You know this. Your grandfather knew this. The elders of your tribe know this. What happens in the next 60 seconds will define your legacy. Will you be remembered as a warrior who fought for his beliefs, or as a killer who murdered an innocent because he was cornered? From her peripheral vision, Imani saw Sergeant Hale returning from the communications facility, moving into position with the security team. She held up a subtle hand signal. Wait, not yet. The gunman was close to braking, but pushing too hard could trigger the violent response they were trying to avoid. Tell me, Imani said, switching tactics. Why did they choose you for this part of the mission? Why station you here with a hostage while others attempted the real objective? The question landed like she'd hoped. The gunman's face showed a flash of bitter understanding. He'd been used, positioned as the expendable distraction while others pursued the actual goal. His hand loosened slightly on the weapon. They told you this was important, Imani continued. They told you that you were protecting something vital. But they gave you the suicide mission while they took the survivable one. Does that sound like brothers who honor you? Stop talking, the gunman said, but there was no force behind it. I won't stop because I've seen this pattern before. Young men convinced to sacrifice themselves while their leaders escape to fight another day. You're not a martyr, you're a pawn. But you don't have to remain one. The weapon lowered by centimeters, just enough. Imani saw Hale tense, ready to give the order for the security team to move. But she shook her head fractionally. Not yet. Let him choose. My grandfather was a warrior, the gunman said finally, his voice breaking. He would be ashamed of what I've become. Then honor him now, Imani replied gently. Make the choice that brings honor back to your family name. Release your hostage. Surrender your weapon. Face justice with dignity rather than dying in disgrace. The silence stretched for what felt like an eternity. Then, slowly, the gunman pulled the weapon away from Davis's head. He didn't immediately drop it, his hand still gripped the pistol, but he stepped back, creating space between himself and his hostage. Davis, showing remarkable composure, didn't run. He moved carefully, deliberately, stepping away from the gunman while keeping his hands visible. The security team began to close in, but Imani held up her hand again, stopping them. Lower the weapon to the ground, she told the gunman in Arabic. Slowly. Show everyone here that you are a man of honor, not a desperate criminal. The gunman looked directly at Imani, his eyes filled with tears of rage and shame. Then he knelt, placed the weapon on the ground, and put his hands behind his head. The security team moved in immediately, securing him efficiently but without unnecessary force. As they led him away, Imani felt her legs suddenly weaken. The adrenaline that had sustained her through the negotiation evaporated, leaving behind bone-deep exhaustion. She'd been awake for nearly 24 hours, had led a rescue mission through hostile territory, and had just talked down an armed hostage-taker. The accumulated stress hit her all at once. She felt tears streaming down her face before she realized she was crying. Not from fear or relief, but from the sheer emotional weight of everything that had happened. Davis, now safely away from danger, stared at her with an expression of complete bewilderment. Commander Pierce approached, his weathered face showing both approval and concern. Martinez, that was exceptional work. The negotiation, the cultural knowledge, the tactical awareness, all of it. Thank you, sir, Imani managed, swiping at her tears. I'm sorry, You just resolved 2 crisis situations in one day while working on no sleep, Pierce interrupted. The tears are completely understandable and honestly, expected. Sergeant Hale joined them, having finished securing the scene. He looked at Imani's tear-streaked face and then at Commander Pierce. Sir, with your permission, I'd like to speak with Specialist Martinez. Privately. Pierce nodded and walked away. Hale waited until they were alone before speaking, his voice lower than Imani had ever heard it. Martinez, I need to tell you something, and I need you to really hear me. What I've seen from you today, the tactical excellence, the cultural expertise, the emotional intelligence that allowed you to negotiate that hostage release, it's extraordinary. But more than that, it's made me realize something about leadership and strength that I should have understood years ago. Imani waited, too exhausted to respond, tears still flowing. I spent 20 years believing that emotions were weakness, Hale continued. That good operators had to be hard, unyielding, immune to feelings. I dismissed people like you because I thought your tears meant you couldn't handle the pressure. But watching you today, I finally understand, your emotions aren't despite your strength. They're part of what makes you strong. Hale's words hung in the air between them, and Imani felt something shift in her chest, not the familiar weight of dismissal she'd carried for months, but something lighter, almost like relief. She wiped her face with the back of her hand, aware that half the base personnel were probably watching this interaction. Sergeant, she said quietly, I appreciate what you're saying, but words don't erase 9 months of being treated like I didn't belong. Of having my thoroughness questioned as suspicious. Of being told to stay in my lane every time I tried to contribute beyond my narrow job description. You're right, Hale acknowledged without hesitation. And I can't erase those 9 months. But I can acknowledge that I was wrong, that my biases blinded me to your capabilities, and that this unit failed you by not seeing what you had to offer. He paused, seeming to wrestle with something. There's something else you should know. After I questioned your focus in that meeting weeks ago, I initiated an investigation into your background. Imani felt anger flash through her exhaustion. An investigation? I was looking for proof that you were a security risk, Hale admitted, his face reddening. Instead, I found sealed records, classified designations, and accommodations from operations that officially never happened. I could have brought that information forward, could have asked the questions that would have revealed your real background. But I didn't, because I was more interested in proving you didn't belong than in understanding why you were really here. Why are you telling me this now? Because you deserve to know that my failure wasn't just passive dismissal, it was active obstruction. And because I need you to understand that when I apologize, I'm apologizing for all of it. The investigation, the doubt, the systematic undermining of your contributions. Hale met her eyes directly. I was wrong, and I'm sorry. Before Imani could respond, Davis approached hesitantly. His hands were still shaking slightly from the ordeal, but his expression was one of conflicted gratitude. Martinez, he started, then stopped, clearly struggling for words. You saved my life. After I spent weeks questioning your loyalty, doubting your dedication, suggesting you were some kind of security risk, and you still saved my life. That's the job, Imani said simply. No, it's more than the job. You could have let someone else negotiate. You could have held back and let the situation play out differently. Davis's voice cracked. I heard what you said to him, about honor and family and making choices that define your legacy. You gave him an exit with dignity when you could have just treated him like an enemy to be neutralized. He was a human being making terrible choices, Imani replied. Treating him as such was the only way to resolve the situation without more bloodshed. That's exactly what I'm talking about, Davis said. That emotional intelligence, that ability to see the humanity in someone who was literally threatening to kill me, I dismissed that as weakness. I thought being a good operator meant being hard, unfeeling, focused only on the mission. But you showed me that sometimes the most effective tactical choice is the most human one. He extended his hand, and Imani shook it, feeling the tremor that still ran through his grip. I owe you an apology too, Davis continued. For the conversations behind your back, for the doubts I spread about your focus and dedication. I was wrong, and I'm going to make sure everyone on this base knows I was wrong. As Davis walked away, Commander Pierce returned with Lieutenant Commander Walsh. The psychologist's expression was thoughtful, analytical in the way that made Imani simultaneously grateful and wary. Specialist Martinez, Walsh began, I've been reviewing your performance over the past 24 hours, and I'd like to discuss something with you. The emotional responses you've shown, the tears during debriefs, the empathy you demonstrated during negotiation, these aren't liabilities. They're actually indicators of exceptional emotional regulation. Imani blinked, too tired to fully process this. I'm sorry, what? Think about it, Walsh explained. You cry during mission debriefs, yes. But you never cry during actual operations. You feel the full weight of what's happening, but you don't let those emotions compromise your tactical decision-making. That's not weakness, that's extraordinary emotional control. You're allowing yourself to feel and process trauma in appropriate contexts while maintaining perfect composure when lives are on the line. Most operators who seem hard aren't actually managing their emotions better, Walsh continued. They're suppressing them, which often leads to long-term psychological damage, PTSD, substance abuse, relationship problems. You've found a way to be fully present emotionally while still performing at an elite level. That's incredibly rare. Commander Pierce nodded in agreement. Which brings us to the question of your future assignment. Martinez, I've been in contact with SOCOM leadership, and they're proposing something new, a hybrid role that would utilize both your analytical expertise and operational capabilities. Imani felt her heart rate increase. What kind of role, sir? You'd be assigned to a specialized unit that conducts high-risk operations requiring both tactical excellence and cultural expertise. You'd operate in the field when necessary, but you'd also lead intelligence analysis and strategy development. Essentially, you'd be the bridge between intelligence and operations, something this command desperately needs. The role would also involve training other operators in cultural awareness and emotional intelligence, Walsh added. Teaching them that strength doesn't mean suppressing humanity, that effective operators need both tactical skills and emotional awareness. Imani looked between them, processing this unexpected opportunity. It was more than she'd hoped for, a role that acknowledged all of her capabilities without forcing her to choose between them. But it also meant returning fully to a world she'd tried to leave behind. Sir, I need to be honest, she said carefully. Part of me wants this role desperately. It's everything I've been preparing for, whether I admitted it to myself or not. But part of me is still scared. Scared of losing myself in the work again, scared of making decisions that get people killed, scared of becoming someone who can't feel anymore. Those fears are exactly why you're the right person for this role, Pierce replied. Martinez, we don't need operators who feel nothing. We need operators who feel everything and still have the courage to act. Your emotions aren't something to overcome, they're part of what makes you exceptional. 3 weeks had passed since the hostage crisis, and Imani stood in the same briefing room where she'd once been relegated to equipment manifests and ignored suggestions. But everything had fundamentally changed. The specialized operations patch on her shoulder now reflected her dual role, and when she spoke, the room didn't just listen, they leaned forward, taking notes. The target compound has 3 entry points, she explained, pointing to the holographic display. But the cultural context matters as much as the tactical layout. The family inside observes strict separation protocols. A frontal assault would be seen as a violation of honor, which could turn potential intelligence sources into hostile witnesses. Captain Williams, her new team leader, nodded thoughtfully. So you're recommending the Eastern approach? With a female-led negotiation team, Imani confirmed. Their cultural traditions actually give us an advantage if we respect them. A woman negotiator won't be seen as threatening in the same way, and can access areas of the compound that would be off-limits to male operators. Sergeant Hale, who now deferred to her expertise on such matters, added his input. Martinez's approach on the last 3 operations has resulted in 0 civilian casualties and significantly better intelligence yields. The cultural awareness component isn't just ethical, it's tactically superior. As the briefing concluded and the team dispersed to prepare, Imani felt a hand on her shoulder. She turned to find Davis, who'd requested transfer to her unit after the hostage incident. Martinez, got a minute? He asked. They walked to the observation deck overlooking the training grounds. The Mediterranean sun painted everything in warm afternoon light, and Imani felt a sense of peace she hadn't experienced in years. I wanted you to know something, Davis began. I've been talking to the other junior personnel, the ones who felt dismissed or overlooked because they didn't fit the traditional operator mold. Your example has changed how they see themselves, how they approach their roles. I didn't do anything special, Imani protested. That's exactly the point. You were just yourself, emotional, thorough, uncompromising about your values. And it turned out that being yourself made you more effective, not less. Davis smiled. There's a woman in intelligence who's been hiding her tactical training because she thought emotions and empathy would disqualify her. She approached me yesterday asking how to request a role like yours. Imani felt tears prickling her eyes, the familiar emotional response that she'd learned to accept rather than suppress. What did you tell her? I told her that the strongest operators I know are the ones who have the courage to remain human in a profession that often demands otherwise. I told her about watching you cry during a mission debrief and then lead a rescue operation hours later. I told her that your emotions aren't despite your strength, they're part of what makes you strong. The words echoed what Hale had said weeks earlier, but hearing them from Davis, who'd been one of her harshest critics, carried different weight. The old guard is changing, Davis continued. Not everywhere, not all at once, but it's happening. And it's happening because you refuse to become something you weren't. You prove that there are different ways to be strong, different ways to be effective. That evening, Imani sat in her quarters writing in the journal she'd maintained since Yemen. For years, these entries had been filled with doubt, grief, and the constant question of whether she belonged in special operations. Tonight, she wrote something different. Today I realized that I've been asking the wrong question. It was never about whether I belonged in this world, it was about whether this world was ready to accept that strength comes in different forms. That the best operators aren't necessarily the ones who feel nothing, but the ones who feel everything and still find the courage to act. Lieutenant Chen died because I followed orders to verify questionable intelligence. For 3 years, I carried that guilt like a weight that would crush me if I ever stopped moving. But I understand now that honoring her memory doesn't mean suppressing the emotions her death caused. It means using those emotions, the grief, the determination, the absolute refusal to let others die unnecessarily, to become better at what I do. I cry during mission debriefs. I feel the weight of every decision. I carry the humanity of this work in ways that make some people uncomfortable. And I've finally accepted that these aren't flaws to overcome, they're strengths to embrace. A knock on her door interrupted her writing. Sergeant Hale stood in the hallway, his expression serious but not unkind. Martinez, got orders from SOCOM. There's a situation developing in Tunisia. High-value target, complex cultural dynamics, minimal time for planning. Command is requesting you specifically. Imani closed her journal and stood, feeling the familiar pre-mission focus settling over her. What's the timeline? Wheels up in 2 hours. This one's going to be challenging, the kind of operation that requires someone who can think tactically and culturally simultaneously. So basically, Tuesday, Imani replied with a slight smile. Hale returned the smile. Basically Tuesday. Martinez, there's something else. The team specifically requested you. Not because command assigned you, but because they trust your judgment, your skills, and yes, your emotional intelligence. They know that having you on the operation makes success more likely. As Imani began gathering her gear, she reflected on how far she'd come. 9 months ago, she'd been the overlooked analyst, dismissed as too soft for real operations. Now she was being requested by name for the missions that mattered most, not despite her emotional awareness but because of it. The journey from invisibility to recognition hadn't been easy. It had required proving herself repeatedly, facing down armed adversaries, and having the courage to remain authentically herself in an environment that often demanded conformity. But it had also revealed a truth that was beginning to reshape special operations culture: the most effective warriors aren't always the ones who announce themselves with traditional displays of hardness and aggression. Sometimes, they're the ones who cry during debriefs and still show up for the next mission. The ones who see enemies as human beings without forgetting they're still threats. The ones who understand that emotional intelligence and tactical excellence aren't opposing forces, they're complementary strengths that, when combined, create something more powerful than either alone. The Tunisian operation went exactly as planned, which in special operations meant it barely resembled the original plan at all. Imani had negotiated with a high-value target's family matriarch, used cultural protocols to gain access to secure information, and helped execute an extraction that resulted in 0 casualties and intelligence that would prevent attacks across 3 countries. 6 months after that mission, she stood in a very different briefing room at Naval Special Warfare Command headquarters. The walls were lined with faces of legendary SEALs, their accomplishments etched in plaques and photographs. Today, her face would join them, not on the wall of fame, but in the training materials used to prepare the next generation of operators. Commander Pierce stood at the front of the room addressing a class of SEAL candidates. Today we're discussing a case study that challenges conventional thinking about what makes an effective special operator. This is the story of a woman who was systematically dismissed, overlooked, and told to stay in her lane for 9 months. The same woman who then led one of the most successful series of operations in recent special warfare history. The candidates watched as footage played showing Imani's hostage negotiation, her tactical planning sessions, and interviews with team members who'd initially doubted her. Davis appeared on screen, his testimony particularly powerful given his early skepticism. "I thought emotional intelligence was weakness," Davis said in the video. "I thought good operators had to be hard, unfeeling machines. Watching Martinez work taught me that I was confusing emotional suppression with emotional control. She feels everything, probably more than most of us, but she's learned to let those emotions inform her decisions rather than control them." Sergeant Hale's interview followed. "For 20 years, I evaluated operators based on traditional metrics: physical strength, aggression, willingness to follow orders without question. Martinez forced me to reconsider what strength actually means. Sometimes the strongest choice is showing vulnerability. Sometimes the bravest act is refusing to become callous." After the presentation, Pierce invited Imani to address the candidates. She stood before them, seeing in their faces the same mixture of determination and uncertainty she'd once felt. "Some of you are wondering if you're tough enough for this," she began. "If you can suppress your emotions sufficiently, if you can become hard enough to survive in special operations. I'm here to tell you that's the wrong question." She paused, gathering her thoughts. "The right question is, can you remain human while doing inhuman work? Can you feel the full weight of your actions and still have the courage to act when necessary? Can you cry during a debrief and still show up for the next mission? I spent years hiding parts of myself because I thought they made me weak. My emotional awareness, my empathy, my tendency to analyze cultural context rather than just tactical situations, I treated these as flaws to overcome. But those supposed weaknesses became my greatest strengths once I stopped trying to be someone I wasn't." A female candidate in the front row raised her hand. "How did you handle people who said you didn't belong? Who questioned your capabilities?" Imani smiled, remembering the long months of dismissal. "I proved them wrong. Not by becoming what they expected, but by being excellent at what I actually was. Some of them eventually apologized. Others never acknowledged they were wrong. Either way, I didn't need their validation once I had my own." Another candidate asked, "What about the emotional toll? How do you process the weight of combat decisions?" "I cry," Imani answered honestly. "I write in my journal. I talk to mental health professionals. I let myself feel the grief and doubt and fear, and then I use those emotions to fuel my determination to be better, to make decisions that honor the weight they carry." She looked across the room. "The operators who scare me aren't the ones who feel too much, they're the ones who feel nothing at all." After the session, Imani walked across the base toward the communications facility where her next assignment awaited. She'd been promoted to lieutenant, given command of a new unit specifically designed to integrate cultural expertise with tactical operations. Her team would train operators across all special warfare units, teaching them that emotional intelligence wasn't a soft skill, it was a combat multiplier. Her phone buzzed with a message from Rachel, her friend who'd kept distance during those difficult early months. "Saw your promotion. Proud of you. Sorry it took me so long to say it." Imani typed back, "It took all of us time to learn these lessons. Just glad we learned them." As she entered the facility, she passed a group of young intelligence analysts huddled around a terminal. One of them, a small woman who couldn't have been more than 23, looked up as Imani passed. "Ma'am, can I ask you something?" the analyst ventured nervously. "Of course. I've been thinking about trying out for tactical training, but I'm I'm not sure I'm the right type. I get emotional about things, I cry when missions go wrong, and people have suggested I'm too soft for field operations. Imani stopped, seeing her younger self in this woman's uncertain expression. What's your name? Specialist Keiko Tanaka, ma'am. Specialist Tanaka, let me tell you something that took me years to learn. Being emotional doesn't mean being weak. Crying doesn't mean being incapable. The fact that you feel deeply, that you care about outcomes beyond just tactical success, those aren't flaws to overcome. They're strengths to develop. Tanaka's eyes widened. Really? Really? The most effective operators I know are the ones who have the courage to remain human in situations that demand otherwise. If you want tactical training, pursue it. Don't try to become someone you're not, become the most excellent version of who you are. As Imani continued to her office, she reflected on the journey that had brought her here. From the overlooked analyst who counted equipment, to the operator who proved size and emotion weren't indicators of weakness, to the leader who was changing how special operations thought about strength and capability. The change wasn't complete. There were still commands where emotional intelligence was viewed with suspicion, still leaders who believed only traditional displays of hardness indicated competence. But slowly, operation by operation, the culture was evolving. And it was evolving because people like Imani had refused to accept that there was only one way to be strong, one way to be effective, one way to serve. She opened her laptop and began reviewing the mission brief for her next operation. Another complex situation requiring cultural sensitivity and tactical precision. Another opportunity to prove that the deadliest warriors don't always announce themselves, that strength comes in forms that don't always fit traditional expectations. Imani smiled as she worked, occasionally wiping away tears that came when she read about the civilians her team's previous operation had protected. She was emotional, empathetic, and uncompromising about remaining human. She was also one of the most effective special operators in the command. And she'd learned that those two truths weren't contradictory, they were complementary parts of what made her exceptional. The sun set over the base, painting the sky in shades of amber and gold. Somewhere out there, another overlooked analyst was studying maps nobody asked her to study, preparing for opportunities nobody thought she deserved, refusing to accept the limitations others placed on her potential. Imani hoped that woman's journey would be easier than hers had been. That the lessons learned, the culture slowly changing, would mean fewer years of being invisible before being seen. But even if it wasn't easier, Imani knew that woman would succeed. Because the ones who refused to be diminished, who maintained their humanity despite pressure to suppress it, who proved through excellence rather than conformity, those are the ones who change the world. One mission at a time. One tear-stained debrief at a time. One moment of courage at a time. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out. And don't forget to subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any upload from us.